I told you we got a stacked deck. Here it comes. Panel number one. I have the pleasure of introducing our first panel of the day, the city's economic recovery and future of workers. Please join me in welcoming co-chairs and members of the Future of Workers Task Force. Lauren Andersen, University Associate Provost of Careers and Industry Partnerships at CUNY. Katy Gaul-Stigge, the President and CEO of Goodwill Industries of Greater New York and Northern New Jersey. Lisette, Nieves, the President of the Fund for the City of New York. Abby Jo Sigal, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Talent and Workforce Development. And Alysia Steinmann, the Metro New York Office Managing Partner at Ernst & Young, all in conversation with New York One's Errol Lewis. Give folks a round of applause as they come up.
Good morning, and good morning to everyone watching on the live stream. We have only a little bit of time, so we're going to jump right into it. I know that, like many of you, when you say government or a public-private task force, people start to wonder, well, is this just a placeholder? Is this just a way to frame a question? Or is this really going to be something that guides and shapes policy? And that's what I think we all want to know as well. So we're going to get into it. Let me start by asking each of the panelists to say briefly, we've seen barriers to entry to different career pathways. That, of course, is the task at hand. On the other hand, we have a very unusual economy, so that many of the ways that we've developed techniques to deal with this may or may not apply in the age of work from home or as we recover from the pandemic. And would love to get your impressions as to how this task force can best address those issues. And let me start with you, Alysia.
Sure. Thanks for having me. As the lone employer here, I'm happy to join these other colleagues. When we think about workforce development and the pandemic, we shifted to a hybrid model, right? So we all got used to working in a remote environment very quickly. So we adapted to Zoom and Teams, and I think that gives us a unique opportunity to train and to hire in many different ways that we didn't think were possible before. So I'm excited to collaborate and getting more New Yorkers employed. So folks who maybe didn't have the same flexibility of coming to work every day in an office, or maybe folks with disabilities who have challenges. Those are the folks that we're collectively targeting and hoping to re-engage into the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm next. I thank you for having me. It's fantastic to be here. I think we have a real opportunity right now. I often say the stars are aligned. We learned a lot over the past 2 years from the pandemic. We also know a lot as a field. We have a lot of best practice and learnings. And what we don't have is a system that's truly working for New Yorkers or for employers or for the economy overall. So the goal here is really to take those learnings from here in New York, from the work that all of you do, and also from around the country and around the world, and say, okay, we're New York, we're going to have the best talent development system of any place, and what do we need to do that? And that's really the task at hand with this task force, and to do so it's not just one sector, one silo, just the public, just the private, just the nonprofit. It's all of us together, because it's not a single entity, sector, or organization that's going to get us to where we need to be. So I think we're at a good time. We have the state and city in conversations in ways we haven't seen before. We have a federal government that's supportive. So we're ready to go. So I think it's a good time.
And we have the voluntary sector as well, Lisette.
Yes, hi. I think one of the things that's going to be exciting about this is that we actually get to baseline what the field has been doing already, which is what are the outcomes, right? What do we know that are going to be really excellent kind of programming and standards that happen there? And then we could do that at a level, but more importantly, also say where along the path of workers are there opportunities? Those with disabilities, those who are just out of school, those who are older workers, right? And I think right now, people don't get a sense of the continuum of the kind of sophisticated provider community that's out there. So we could give them a sense of that continuity, but we could also give them a baseline of what does quality mean in that. And then it's really catching up to the field. So I'm looking forward to that.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I had to run out there for a second and get a little water. I'm really looking forward to this task force. People have been asking me, obviously, what it might be different about this task force. And I do think that what I'm looking forward to and what I think is really different is
the building. We really have put a lot in place, what we've learned in the last several years, not just from the pandemic, but the work that we called for in the past, and the building blocks are there. If we talk about common metrics, if we talk about the work with employers, if we talk about the industry partnerships, we've got a lot of great building blocks that I think this task force can really force forward. And I'm very excited to see the change and what could be different in this particular time.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. Good to see some familiar faces. And also greetings on behalf of Chancellor Felix Matos Rodriguez, who is co-chairing this task force and wishes he could be here today, but sends his regards. This past decade and the past 3 years has seen so much evolution and really accelerated the kind of change that we knew was coming in the long run, but had to really tackle very quickly. And that will always be the case when it comes to workforce, when it comes to workers, there will always be change. I come from the tech sector where skills are evolving every single minute and every single year. It's hard to predict 2 years in advance, let alone 10. And so the thing that will allow us all to succeed and thrive in serving New Yorkers and getting into jobs and helping businesses grow is building the muscle of working together to anticipate and adapt to those changes as they come. So this was a really interesting couple of years for testing out how that would work and accelerating that. And this task force is sort of critical to not just information sharing, not just talking about this moment in time, but actually building off the learnings of the past and integrating how we build that muscle for working together so that when big changes happen in the future, which they will, we're ready for them and we can work together as a system.
Okay. I had a particular question for some of you. And Lisette, timely funding for providers, which I know a lot of people watching are concerned. It's always an issue. How do we make sure that promising programs don't suffer due to cash flow problems?
Well, I wish I could wave that wand too. No, I think it's actually a really important question. And I think this is actually an administration that's been focused on looking on kind of clearing up the backlog, but that's a real issue, right? I mean, I'm proud to be at the fund because we get to do kind of what we call bridge financing to support organizations to get that done. But that's a really important part of this ecosystem in a way that it's very sophisticated and reliant on government funds. And we need to figure out a way to move that forward. We've done a lot better. I think there's certain agencies that need a little bit more attention, but there's no question that we're probably the only city that has a bridge financing backup option than others. And that is actually goes a long way for many of the providers. But contracting reform in general, for anybody in the sector, and I guess I'll end on this, the reason why that's so important too is that 1 in 6 employees are in the sector, right? So when we talk about what does it mean to say, what does workforce look like in a braided system, we're also talking about everybody who's in this room, right? We're talking about what's the talent they need that they can have and get support from, so it's all connected.
Right. And Alysia, in keeping with sort of asking about, I guess, the overall architecture of how to make something like this work, do private sector firms need sort of a one-stop access? I mean, what's the thing that will make sure that we unlock a lot of the potential? Because we hear, even as there are threats of a recession, there's still a lot of hiring going on, and that we're almost at our pre-pandemic levels.
Yeah, it's a great question. We are constantly looking for talent. We are excited about hiring New Yorkers. It's just about finding the pathways for them to apply, for them to know the opportunities. And what's really exciting about this, and each one of these women is amazing in their own right, but collectively. So there's a lot of bespoke programs that run very well on their own. But you don't get the power and scale. You don't get the change effect unless you come together and say, let's create a system together that from soup to nuts, right? So you start with the schools, with the chancellor of the DOE, you have them move through CUNY and then into employment. So it's really about the entire life cycle of a New Yorker. It's about them starting in the schools and getting meaningful employment through the whole process. So working together to create a system that supports businesses more broadly, we always have hiring needs, but so does every other employer in the city. So it's not about EY. It's not about another company. It's about the worker and having them gain employment. So for us, it's working together, and taking all the different pieces that already exist and creating a system-wide change.
And as Lisette mentioned, there are seniors, there are lower income communities or families that may not have broadband access, in the work from home era. There are younger workers who may have been out of the ability to sort of understand or learn office procedure firsthand over the last few years. How do we deal with that?
So there's a lot of opportunity, and I think through the pandemic, it showed us, like I mentioned before, we don't need to be in an office to work every day. And so where people were limited in their ability to travel and go to an office every day, that works for a lot of people, but it also doesn't work for a lot of New Yorkers. And to your point, there's a lot of older New Yorkers that have been out of the workforce. They have great skills, but it doesn't match with the hiring needs of employers. So working together and saying, okay, this person has these skills, but now let's see if we can get them skilled in tech, which is obviously, the largest growing sector. So let's get them a program where they don't have to go back and get another degree, but we can certify them and get them a certification or training, and then they're qualified to work. So it's getting them back in those programs, reskilling them, upskilling them, and partnering with programs that can do that then will feed right into our employment.
And Lauren, to the extent that the community colleges are vitally important here, tuition assistance, other programs, I've learned from talking with your boss on various panels, they're often geared toward full or part-time students who are pursuing a degree. So that certification, non-degree programming and training often doesn't have the right support, doesn't have the right culture within any university. Even CUNY doesn't necessarily even have the right administrative backbone to make it happen easily. How do we deal with that, and how do we make sure that doesn't get lost in all of this?
Great question. So I want to get back to something that Abby Jo actually said, which is, it is amazing to have public officials at the senior most level who get that nuance and who really want to support the ability to meet New Yorkers wherever they are with the kind of skills and education they need. And so, one of the things that was in the governor's budget this past year was TAP for workforce credentials. And so that will be a really exciting space. We're still exploring how it might be rolled out in various ways, but that will really take credentials that have proven industry value, where students at community colleges can take advantage of those courses that articulate to credit, so that if they want to continue along their degree program afterward, they can. And it will provide the kind of long-term sustained support that we need for those kinds of programs. In the meantime, we couldn't have possibly gotten there without a lot of partners across the ecosystem who have taken time and invested to make sure those credentials are actually meaningful and actually leading to employment. And that is something where, over the past 5 years, there's been a lot of change in how much people are willing to work together, to Alicia's point. And that is going to be essential for proving what's possible as we get these new funding streams that'll scale them.
Okay, and Katy, the putting together of the task force, the surfacing of ideas and strategies is one thing. Building a constituency for it and having it really not just sort of flow out of the administration, but also sort of build support throughout the city, public and private sector, is a task unto itself. How do we, and I guess the people who are watching, how do we make that happen?
Well, I'm really excited to be the nonprofit co-chair, trying to represent all of you. So I really do want your feedback as well. This is a great opportunity for me to ask directly. New York City Employment and Training Coalition will be helping me to get some information directly from you for the task force and our 5 pillars. And I would list them, but I don't want to miss one. So I think it's really important that we, as a community of over 200 members here and other nonprofits, might not be classically workforce development. Our foster care systems, our that comes to mind. Other systems, other nonprofits that are a part of the ecosystem really that all these voices, because exactly as Errol says, we are the deliverers of this product, and we're really going to be the ones making changes. But we also have to acknowledge that there might be change in behavior, like you were asking with EY. Like, for employers, can we still do things the same way as nonprofits, as workforce providers, if there are some new pathways? And the answer is going to be no. We are going to have to make some adjustments ourselves with maybe a stronger WDB or a different kind of structure. Welcome, everybody. We're excited you're here. But so, I think that's the big thing, is that we really want to, I really want to hear from you. I really take my role here seriously as the voice of the nonprofits. And I really want to make sure that as implementers, we are the ones that feed the hungry. We are the ones that house the homeless. We are the ones that find folks jobs. We are the ones that bulldoze those barriers, that make sure somebody has Wi-Fi at home, that make sure that they've got that MetroCard, that make sure that they have that daycare. All of those things are the things that allow work to really happen. And that's where the nonprofits are. That's our muscle. And that's what we do. And that's really where we need to be supported to do it.
Okay, so Abby Jo, as the conductor of this orchestra, or one of them, talk a little bit about the concept behind the task force, why the different sectors, and how, functionally you're going to take what they bring to the table and turn it into policy.
Sure. So the concept of the task force is that when we talk about talent development and workforce development, we can't think about it from one sector. So we really need a representation from across education, nonprofits, unions, the public sector, policy researchers, and we really need to bring that sort of brain trust together. A lot of folks said you can't do more than 30. There's over 60 people on the task force. And again, it's not even just the folks in the task force. As Katy said, we really want the best practice learnings that you all have to really come up to this work. The rationale behind it is we're at a beginning of administration. We can really lay out a blueprint for what we want to do differently, so that we really have a system that's designed for the outcomes we want, not the outcomes that we currently get. So it's really to set the stage for the infrastructure that's needed. So as Lauren said, we can build the muscle to work together across these different sectors to address real-time challenges. So if we're not serving a particular population, or if something with technology accelerates and has unintended consequences, we can address it. We need to have that infrastructure in place. Otherwise, we're all scrambling and New Yorkers don't do as well as they need to do. And we as a city don't thrive, and employers can't find the talent they need. We also, if you look at Executive Order 22 that the mayor signed in August, it really laid out citywide objectives when it came to talent and workforce development, really making sure that those are not objectives that the city's just saying, but those are the objectives that we all share, and that we are all aligned and working towards that will be critically important if we really want to start tackling the challenges of unemployment or underemployment or not enough people in living wage jobs here in the city. In addition to the task force, which is a sprint, it's happening between now and January to really lay the foundation, is we also set up an interagency cabinet, which will have chief workforce officers from all of the agencies. As you all well know, this work gets done by multiple agencies in the city, over 20, probably about 75 different funding streams with different requirements, whether it's federal, state, or local. So the idea with the cabinet is that we can bring together all of those entrepreneurs within the city who are doing incredible work within their agencies to come together and say, we too are trying to achieve these objectives. We know we need to do it in partnership with each other, and also in partnership with employers and nonprofits and all the other providers that we work with. How do we do a better job? So the idea, again, is really to have this task force develop a blueprint, that it be as a working document that sets the stage, working with the interagency cabinet to really implement that over the course of the administration, and to come out of this task force with with infrastructure that's clear on how we work together going forward. And that's how we've sort of set up the working groups or the pillars, as Katy discussed.
And I know it may feel a little premature, sort of like, while you're building the scaffolding to, ask about what color the penthouse room is going to be, but what are some of the metrics that you think are going to count? What do you think when the architecture of it is built out and we go into next year and something or other is asked for in the city budget? and it's all starting to hum. What do you think are the numbers or the metrics or the indicators that you'll be watching?
Yeah, this is always a tricky question, and I know we all sort of wrestle with it from our particular seats. So I think there's been a lot of focus on what are the programmatic outcomes, and what, at the end of the day, that's really what matters. Like how many New Yorkers are employed in living wage jobs, how many young people are launching into fulfilling economically secure careers, making sure that we are looking at it and addressing any historic disparities when it comes to people of color or seniors or people with disabilities. Those are super important. So understanding what those are, and then also understanding what programmatic measures ladder up to that. So what I think we need to really be looking at are what are the institutional metrics, and we have a working group that's focused on that. What are the institutional metrics we need to measure to show that we're changing? So for instance, one of the things we look at is looking at CUNY, for example, looking at their degree programs. How many of their degree programs are really incorporating learning from work into those degree programs? Because we know on-the-job training and learning from work is a really good way of connecting into the labor market, because in addition to gaining the skills in real time in the place that you're working, you're also building those professional networks that are often so key. So part of the task force and one of the working groups is how do we measure impact on that? Additionally, from the task force, another key piece is focusing on critical occupations and skills. So this is one of the things that I hope we'll be able to, as a community, is really agree that occupations are going to be the organizing unit. So we often talk about sectors, which is super important because that shows what's growing, what's shrinking, where the opportunity is, particularly where the jobs are that have economic mobility. We also often talk about specific skills that are needed. I would say sectors are sort of too big and skills are too small. So the Goldilocks are the occupations and the bundle of skills that are related to them. And if we can be very clear as a city, what are the occupations that are powering the city, that are powering the economy, and then really understand of those occupations, which ones are jobs for the future uses the framework, which ones are static, so which ones are not getting you to a living wage job, which ones are springboard jobs, so maybe day one it's not living wage, but it's definitely a pathway that gets you there, and then what are lifetime jobs. So we have a real understanding about the jobs that are powering our economy and which ones we really need to figure out how to move from static to springboard or lifetime. And then really looking at those that create economic mobility and making sure we're using that to then think about how do we expand apprenticeships in those occupations, because we know that works. How do we expand make sure we have enough talent developers, whether it's all of you folks in the nonprofit field, all of the folks at CUNY and other educational institutions. How do we make sure we're getting New Yorkers from into those promising occupations? Because we're a big city, so we can't all get around the table. We need to have some sort of organizing unit. So that's an example of, if we can show that that's how we're doing it, we can start building that infrastructure around it, so then we can make progress on those bigger objectives and numbers.
And that is really, really hard. I mean, I'll put this out for really the whole panel. I mean, how often, how frequently do we have to have that conversation and make adjustments? Because a lot flows from a decision. If you decide, I'm making this up, but data entry is the occupation where you want to sort of put some effort, just like General Motors, when they decide they want to build a new car, it takes them a couple of years to train people and build the factory and inform and educate the dealer network and on and on and on.
Can I quickly answer that?
Yes.
I think one of the other things that we're looking at is how to expand on the job training and sort of apprenticeship, both registered and lowercase a apprenticeship, because fundamentally, the more we can have learning that's happening at work that's paid and is also credentialed and helps folks get the credentials that they need for employers, the more efficient our system will be, so we can respond in real time to changes in the labor market as well as in those particular jobs. Because otherwise it takes by the time employers, which Sometimes they're great and they figure out what are those skills that are needed. And then they tell the educational institutions, and the educational institutions figure out how to turn in credentials. And then about two or 3 years later, you might have a degree program. And the challenge with that, as we all saw, particularly in COVID, things happen much more quickly than that.
Right. Right. Well, no, that is the challenge. So I'll leave it for everybody. How do we make that happen?
Yeah, so I would say the employer side, it's up to us to communicate with the CUNY and with the task force. Where are our needs right now? Where are skills that are folks that are gaps? But also looking ahead, what roles in 5 years am I going to need that I need to adapt now? So we've worked with CUNY over the last year at EY and created in a program with the Jobs Council, doing just exactly that. We have a software engineering degree, associate's degree that we created with the school. So we sat with the deans, with the professors, and said, let's go over your curriculum. Here's where the skills that we are looking for, how do we incorporate this into your curriculum? Number one. And number two is, how do we have them come to EY, work for a set number of weeks and get credit in lieu of sitting in a classroom? So hands-on, they're learning, they're getting credit, they're getting paid. But that isn't a real-time skills that are needed. We need to go a step further and say, what skills am I going to need in 5 years? That looking 5 years, 10 years, that I can start working with the CUNYs and the other schools and say, let's get that baked into the curriculum now, so that way the workforce is ready in 5 and 10 years.
Yeah, and if I could just build on that, because I completely agree with everything you just said. The other thing too is, if tomorrow the hundreds of thousands of businesses in New York City suddenly turned to all of our organizations and said, we want to build these things with you, we would need a lot more capacity in the field to be able to tackle that. And so what is really, I think, helpful about this task force is that it is not just thinking about what training should we launch today or in 3 years. It's thinking about what is the entire underpinning of this operation that needs to happen, and happen soon, for us to always be able to evolve when everyone comes to the door to be able to do this work. So that is an important piece. And it's something where, as all of you know, systems change, like whether or not we're meeting that infrastructure and setting it up is hard to measure. Like, it's hard to have particular metrics around that, but that's why we all have to do this together, which is why it's really reassuring that we're all up here together and with 70 other folks who are thinking through it.
Yeah, I think that we actually use a complicated system to really avoid this issue of transparency, right? And so this is the challenge here. The challenge here is saying, what actually are the transparent funds that we have? So when Abby's speaking and she says that she's going to have every commissioner heading work for, that's radical. I worked in government. We didn't have that, right? When we sit down and we have the comptroller and the mayor's office looking at a backlog of contracts, that's radical. That doesn't happen, right? This actually means that there's a level of accountability because more eyes are on it, and saying that we are not going to let it stay complicated and invisible. We need it to be transparent. And I think this is a system that also requires that as a whole. Now, what do I mean by that? So for example, we know that there are a couple of things we could do right away. We know SYP works. We know getting young people engaged in work early works. We also know there's a whole population, particularly women of color, who are underemployed. They have made their contract with CUNY, and they have stayed in wages and jobs that are below their credential, right? And how do we think about that? We know that there are folks from the pandemic who have lost jobs who are over 50 that we need to reintegrate. So, and we know, so both can be true. We have both the lowest unemployment rate, but we have a high invisibility rate of those who are underemployed and those who are not being tracked. So that's what this allows for, is transparency across all of that.
And Lisette, just to push that a little bit further, do we need different kinds of metrics to sort of gauge whether or not all of this is working?
Yeah, I think we just need to be transparent with the metrics. I think there are. Yeah, it's going to be tough for the field too. Let me not make this a romantic notion, right?
Right.
No, because I've been a provider as well, right? This is a hard one as well too. It's like, okay, I'm doing really great at the inputs. Now I got to deal with the outcomes. I work with all populations, but actually I'm really gifted at working with this particular population. Yeah, I do think that kind of bar and metrics really important. I also think it's a time for agencies to say, we're both paying providers different rates for the same kind of work. What are we doing here? What does that mean? Right? And so that outcome we can't secure, but this is part of the transparency piece, right? Which is that we have a lot of skilled navigators on both sides who have worked well in a complicated system, but it hasn't been inclusive. So what does that mean to open that up? And there's going to be some difficulties in that, but I think in the end, the bar for what we mean is really going to make a difference. Because it will be, this is what we mean when we're saying, who's an older worker that we can get? Who's a person with disability? Where can we place it, right?
In our last few minutes, Katy, I would love everyone to touch on when we meet again in 6 months, how we'll know we are succeeding, what kind of numbers or outcomes or mood, even if, if that's what it is, will have changed by then.
Well, I think, I just want to echo some of these thoughts and just sort of, put a finer point on some of them, which is I really, I believe in the power of government, as a catalyst for us. I believe, the funders, the foundations, the corporations that fund us, the individual donors that give all these nonprofits money. They are asking the same question. What is the outcome? What are the measurements? And we have to also, hold everyone accountable for paying our own staff more. One of the measures that I would like to see in 6 months is that both these contracts pay, the same rates as well as, pay our own teams what they, the same living wage and the same kind of work that we're saying that we want for everyone else. What I always say is these are the neighbors, friends, and cousins of clients, our DSPs, are our caseworkers, are our line staff. So we really need to make sure that that is in the conversation. That's just one thing I'd like to see in 6 months. I think the other thing overall is I really would like to see that infrastructure that Lauren talked about and Abby talked about, where people are really understanding what would it be like to work together in this infrastructure rather than this one program is being released. So that's the big change. Is not like big shiny program is released, yay, but we have an infrastructure and a way to work together. And that is not measurable, but I think would really change the dynamic.
Okay, Alysia.
Oh, sure. I think that for me, it's working together and holding each other accountable. So for me in 6 months, if Lauren says to me, Alysia, as the employer, you need to do better, we need to hire more, I appreciate that. So the transparency that Lisette talked about, but also holding each other accountable. We each have very important roles, and we're only going to be successful if we hold each other to the same standards.
Okay.
I mean, yes to all of that. And I think, 6 months from now, we will want a slate of recommendations that are reflective of things that are not just superficial and high level, but deep, and reflect deep challenges that are going to be hard to fix. I think that there is an opportunity now, with so much buy-in and so much collective willingness to have teamwork, to actually put into what is produced by this task force, not just scaling up of a couple of superficial things, but a combination of, here are the things we can do tomorrow that'll make a big change, and here are the deep things we have to work on together. I think that will be big.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our time. Please join me in thanking our panel for a really great discussion.